So we've got a problem in Christianity that we need to address immediately, and it is simply this. We don't have enough young pastors. So what's happening more broadly in Reformed and evangelical circles is that pastors are aging out. Many are dying, many are retiring, and they're not being replaced in substantive enough numbers amongst younger men. Now, when I was at General Assembly this past summer, we heard a lot of different reports. We heard a lot of different statistics. But one of the things that we heard as a general concern is that the PCA, right now, we do have an influx of teaching elders or pastors, enough to sustain the most of our ministries for the most part. But in a few years, that dynamic is going to flip in a negative way, in which the amount of replacement pastors that we can find, good, qualified, trained pastors, is not going to be enough to replace those that are aging out or dying out. Now, I'm told that this is a problem more broadly than just in the PCA. And I've experienced this to some extent, even in my seminary experiences at RPTS as an adjunct professor there, in that what we really, really need right now is more students, more young men who are committed to the church, committed to the gospel, committed to preaching, committed to suffering for Christ, enduring difficulty, proclaiming his name. We need young men who are on fire for the Lord and for the sake of his kingdom to come into the ministry, take up the mantle, and carry on what great men like R.C. Sproul and John MacArthur and so forth left for us in the time of their legacies. But that's not happening. In fact, anecdotally, one of the things that we would see at RPTS is that we often have churches that are clamoring for pastors, sometimes for months, sometimes even for years, going without pastors, especially in the smaller Reformed churches and denominations in which training is set at very high bar. And again, replacement levels are at a very low ebb right now. So what's the problem with this? Well, as I've thought about this problem, I've identified what I think are 4 reasons why young men are not going into the ministry, and I want to give you those reasons right now in this particular video. The first is that we've told them that ministry is too hard, okay? We've told people things like this: don't go into the pastoral ministry unless you can't do anything else. I heard that advice. I've given that advice. I've thought back to some of the videos that I've done on this particular channel as it relates to the calling, to ministry, to the lifestyle of preaching, even to the fact of seminary training. And I've said to people, I've advised people, don't go into the pastoral ministry unless you can't do anything else. Now, on one hand, we have to stand by that advice, because the pastoral ministry is a very unique calling. And what we meant by that, when we said things like that, is that you have to be truly called of the Holy Spirit in order to take up the pulpit as your vocation, right? You have to be called. You can't foist a call on yourself. You can't be drawn into pastoral ministry because of idealized reasons that you think it might be a wonderful life or something like that. But here's the problem. Even as we've warned people with the difficulties of the pastoral life, the judgment that we might receive from our churches, the difficulty of preaching the gospel in a postmodern age and so forth, we have failed to show young men how glorious the life of the pastoral ministry truly is. And I think about this now, especially as I'm aging. I'm into my almost into my 50s, not quite. Coming into my 50s, I look back on my career and I think, man, this has been a blessed life. I have truly loved all of the churches that I've served at. They've all treated me kindly. They've all treated my wife kindly and my children kindly. I've loved the challenge of going into the pulpit every Lord's Day with a new, fresh sermon that I've written in that week with the help of the Spirit as I've engaged in the text, ready to proclaim it boldly. This is a thrilling vocation. I love the fact that every day I wake up and I open my Bible and I say, what's my next text that I need to study? Either for Bible study, Wednesday nights, men's group. I love spending time with people that need counseling in their lives. I even love funerals. I know that's weird, but I love weddings and funerals because they're opportunities to speak the gospel to people that probably haven't heard it. Now, there are certain things about ministry, of course, that I like more than others. But unfortunately, I think what we've done is we've told young men that this is a hard life, it's a difficult life, it's an unprofitable life, and we've given them a very bad impression about the joys and thrills of pastoral ministry. Look, I'm to the point right now in my life where every Sunday is an absolute joy. Our church is largely full, we're thriving, we're unified, we're having babies, I've almost got to the point where I'm wondering, gosh, are we experiencing a revival here at Gospel Fellowship? Things are going well. It doesn't always go well, but there's a real joy and sustaining happiness that we have in our hearts when we know we're living out the calling that the Lord has set apart for us. Are there difficulties? Of course, but so are there in every other vocation that you might choose. So the first reason I'm afraid young men aren't going into ministry is because we've somehow given them a dark, gloomy picture of what pastoral life is really like. Second, we have feminized church leadership, and this is very lamentable. Now, thankfully, in strong complementarian denominations like mine, the PCA, I don't think this is as big of a problem as you're going to see in broader evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal megachurches, sort of generic, vanilla, jellyfish type churches that don't really have a core ethos of Bible proclamation and steadfastly standing to the Reformed confessions and so forth. You have a lot of femininity in the leader of the church. In fact, churches for the last 50 years have done everything they possibly can to bend over backwards to bring women into every possible role in the life of the church, including pastors, including elders, including deaconesses. Now, here I can fault those PCA churches that are trying to shoehorn female deacons into the life of the church, because our Constitution currently and thankfully prohibits female pastors and elders. But in almost every role, including the role of seminary professor and so forth, we have utilized women to the extent that we have feminized what it looks like to be called to the pastoral role. And I want you to just think about this for a moment. Think about your childhood. Think about your Sunday school class, assuming you went to Sunday school. How many male Sunday school teachers did you have growing up? How many men? I'm very thankful at our church right now, Gospel Fellowship PCA. We've got Noah, who's a Sunday school teacher. He's a young man in his 20s doing a great job teaching Sunday school. We've got Fred, who's a father of several who teaches Sunday school. We have some godly men in our Sunday school classes, but probably you don't. I'm going to guess that in your church right now, not only if you think back on your own life, but if you look at your church Sunday school teachers right now, how many men do you have teaching children? Now, I can think the same thing for my public education when I went to school. I didn't have a lot of male teachers. I had a male gym teacher and a male art teacher, but all the rest of my main teachers were females. And so we've associated teaching to some extent, with a feminine vocation. Whereas other vocations like a welder, for instance, or a soldier, we think of being very masculine. Well, unfortunately, I think we've done that to the pastoral ministry. We've brought up women to read scripture. We've brought up women to teach in public settings as we ought not to. We have brought up females into the sort of invented role of worship leader constantly, to the extent that our young men look at the church and they see something that's far too feminized and it doesn't have that power of drawing conviction like a real godly enterprise might. Now, certainly we could look out at the evangelical world today more broadly, but particularly in Reformed churches. And we might think, yes, here is a better masculine set of role models. And there are certainly some role models today that I think are doing a very good job of showing the masculinity of the church. But there's no doubt that a lot of young people are fleeing evangelical circles for something more masculine, which they might interpret to be Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. That's one of the reasons why many young people are going that way. They're looking for something solid. They don't want something feminine. They don't want something queer. They don't want something gay. They don't want something weak. They want a church that's strong and solid and faithful, and to some extent, yes, even masculine. Okay, third, lamenting here, we've had a number of ministry failures in very public venues. Now, I could name off a laundry list of them, and I'm not going to do that in this video, but we might cite people like Ravi Zacharias or Steve Lawson or so forth, who've had very public scandals and failures that, to some extent, has denigrated what I consider to be the high office of the pastor. Okay, they look at men like this and they see failures and they say, well, what of it? Who wants something like that? I don't. I'd rather be a sinner in my boldness than a hypocrite in your religiosity. And so, unfortunately, we've denigrated the role of the pastoral office. Now, you probably know I'm an Edwards scholar, and I spent a lot of my life studying the writings and the history and the biography of Jonathan Edwards. Well, Edwards believed that the pastoral office was the highest office. And I think he's right about that. I think there's something very strong, good, and even wonderful about the pastoral vocation. But here's the thing. If we're not going to denigrate the office with our hypocrisy and failure, then we have to honor the office with lives of integrity and faithfulness. And so what we really need are middle-aged men, hopefully in my age category, that show themselves to be men approved over an entire lifetime of faithfulness to their churches, their family, their wives, and their children. And then finally I'll add this as a fourth one. I think what we've done with worshiptainments in the past few years, and certainly I've spoken out on this, not the least of which place would be in my own book on worshiptainment, which I wrote last year. We've showed somehow, unfortunately, that church life is shallow and superficial and glib and just kind of weak. And again, just there's a superficiality. I can't stand the fact that we've raised a generation of young men with Summer at the Movies and all of this nonsense that we see in a lot of these big box evangelical megachurches. They've seen Christianity as a joke. They've seen it as non-serious. What we really need are psalm singing, hymn singing, gospel preaching examples of the masculine office of the pastor. And I think that would probably do wonders to leading a generation of young men into this particular vocation. Difficult? Absolutely. Faithful? Yes. And I will tell you this, in summary, it has been a very blessed life for me and my wife and my children. We've had wonderful experiences. It's a thrilling job. Every day I do exactly what I love every day. Reading, writing, preaching, teaching, visiting, counseling, helping, serving. It's a wonderful life, and would that more younger men would go into it. Well, that's all I have today. Thank you so much for checking in. If you're new to the channel, my name is Matthew, one of the pastors at Gospel Fellowship PCA. We're a Reformed Bible-believing church just north of Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a church like that, come check us out. I'm also adjunct professor at RPTS, the Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary. We're actually in Pittsburgh. Come check us out, rpts.edu. Thanks for checking in. Love you lots. Talk to you later.